In class, the teacher deliberately showed the stockings she was wearing in front of the students. I also left the hotel address in the lower right corner of the book. But Steve, who was in his adolescence, to verify the conjecture in his mind, all the students left after school. He held the textbook and pretended to ask the teacher questions. When Steve leaned down and put the reference book back in its place, he touched the teacher with the corner of his book on purpose. The moment when teachers and students look into each other's eyes, a mutually dependent, abnormal love affair naturally arises. The students in her class were in the throes of adolescence. Every time in class, they will all whisper to each other, discuss some adult topics. After class, groups of boys gather in the toilet to compare sizes. During class today, a student puts gum in his mouth. Steve stuffed it into his mouth without hesitation. Then he took advantage of Viona's inattention. He thought his little tricks were seamless. When he waited until class was over, Viola asked Steve to stay. Then Viola took it away. Notes passed around by boys in class. Look at the content above. Viola knows. This is what adolescent boys should look like. Viola didn't embarrass him that time. Just let Steve clean up the flies on the blackboard before leaving. But when Steve stood on the stool, he slowly turned around. He began to size up this interesting English teacher. Let the hormonal outbreak of Steve began to have a reverie. Every time in Viona's class, Steve can't help but stare at her. He would deliberately get close to feel the breath coming from the other person's body. After class activities, Steve would always look at the window of the teaching building. She will lie on the windowsill at this time to relax her eyes. Little did they know that Viola had already noticed everything. Adolescent Steve began to become even crazier. He even knew clearly the address of Viona's house. The squad leader asked for leave today because of illness. But when going up the stairs, Steve only cared about Viola in front of him. He accidentally broke the handrail of the stairs. At this moment, the principal suddenly passed by downstairs. Viola hid Steve directly behind her. What she didn't expect made a very bold move. Since then, the relationship between the two slowly began to change. The students were all curious and leaned on the guardrail to watch. Steve escaped from the school secretly without anyone paying attention. This time, he boldly came to Viona's house. But the next second, something funny happened to the two. The boy slowly unbuttoned the female teacher's skirt. He stopped for a time because he was too nervous. Under the guidance of the female teacher to summon up courage, completed the transformation from boy to man. But they are more bold. The two of them blatantly flirted with each other in class. He also appointed time on the attendance sheet. Steve would even come to Viona's house in the middle of the night. And Viola is getting more and more unscrupulous. She had to hold Steve's hand at school, too. Sometimes Steve spends the night at Viona's house. Viola will go to class by herself in the morning, lying to the class monitor that Steve called in sick. Seize the time and have a joyful time together. However, paper will never be able to cover the fire. Suddenly the sound behind him scared him half to death. He turned around and saw the teacher's husband sitting at the table. Faced with such a situation, Sher was surprisingly calm. Then, he explained the reason. It turned out that not long after they got married, Viola found Kjell's lover Escarter in the back seat of his car. He knows Viola resents him. He also knew that this day would come sooner or later. So he doesn't blame Steve. Steve still goes to Viona's house often. He is to accompany the female teacher's husband chat. Instead, they got closer and closer. With Steve's encouragement, Sher also began to give up drinking. The intimacy of the relationship left Viola confused. Sher, whose business failed, started drinking again. Steve could only comfort him by stroking his hair. At this time Viola came out of the room. Instead, he kept teasing Steve and letting him come into the room to play games. Steve was silent for a while, then left the house without looking back. This is the first time Steve has rejected Viola. The next day, Viola deliberately asked Steve to come on stage. She untied her skirt and teased him, but Steve turned a blind eye, because he discovered that between him and Viola, the initial freshness and excitement are gone. Steve began to get tired of this simple venting of desire. He is determined to break free from this deformed relationship. Being rejected by Steve again and again, she found the principal to talk. Steve was demoted for absenteeism and failing subject tests. Steve was furious when he found out. Viola used this to take revenge on him. He bursts into the classroom trying to find evidence of his date with Viola, but found that the page had long been torn up by Viola. Viola pulls up her skirt again. Steve kicked down the podium in anger. This is obviously disrespectful to the teacher in the eyes of everyone. Female teacher unbuttoned her clothes in front of male students. She broke the bottle and threatened him. The boy reached out and tried to snatch the bottle from the woman's hand, but no success. Under the threat and prayer of the female teacher, the two fell to the floor. Afterwards, the boy decided to end this abnormal relationship completely. But the female teacher doesn't intend to let him go easily. Also on the grounds of multiple absenteeism, the boy was successfully punished by repeating the grade. The boy was angry, because every time he is absent from school, it is because of a tryst with a female teacher. But the female teacher said no one would believe him, while the boy is writing on the blackboard. Pull-up skirt to seduce boys under the podium. The boy kicked down the table in a fit of pique. How a boy behaves in the eyes of others. It is undoubtedly disrespectful to the teacher. He was also criticized by the headmaster. The boy also tried to find evidence of a female teacher and his tryst. He sneaked into the classroom and found the book where the female teacher had written love words before. Just as the boy was paying the price for this unethical relationship, news of his brother's death suddenly came from the front line. He watched the news of his brother's shipwreck over and over again, until he burst into tears, the only reliance and comfort. And now his brother is dead. The boy begins to learn to take care of his mother's emotions. He seems to have grown up overnight. Adolescent boys who only think about sex and desire. Finally, the boy took revenge on the female teacher in his own way. In front of everyone, straight to the female teacher on the stage. Watching the female teacher close her eyes in horror. This teasing warning. He completely cut off the relationship with the female teacher. This immoral story has a passionate beginning. The result was a dismal finish. The boy finally paid the price in this relationship.